Okay, we are now recording. Welcome back to the webinar as we discuss preparing to surrender to prison, tips 6 through 10. Some of them, of course, will overlap. We're also going to dive into some areas that may not be part of this 6 to 10 list, but they're all related, and they're all geared towards ensuring you get the best outcome. To that end, as a reminder, we encourage you to watch the interviews we've done with subject matter experts like Hugh Hurwitz, who talks about the value of a reentry plan. There are some cynical people who go through this system who tell Sam or Scott or me or anyone, you're just saying this because this is what we want to hear. I appreciate the cynicism. Everything we're conveying to you comes by way of subject matter experts we have interviewed. It's on the Prison Professor's site. You simply need to go to subject matter experts, and it's in your interest to watch these videos as you prepare for life on the inside, okay? As another reminder, cannot change the fact that people are going to prison or that you are unfortunately immersed in this process. I share this because there are some people who occasionally have unrealistic expectations about what should happen to them upon their surrender to prison. And just because you may be eligible for release within 6 hours of your surrender, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. I don't say that to be funny or sarcastic. I share it with you so you can embrace the reality of the situation, that while the law allows perhaps for an earlier release, we don't know if that's going to happen. We cannot guarantee what a case manager may or may not do. And we've got to continue to reinforce this because it continues to come up with people who are in prison. And we continue to unfortunately get news from clients or people who go through our program in prison that staff is ignoring them, that staff is blowing them off. Staff tells them they're not even eligible for the First Step Act. Tell them this law doesn't apply to you, that they're not required to enforce it. So part of this experience, and as we've learned, you've got to be prepared to embrace some discomfort. And I share this, and I won't get into the name, but Sam and I received a message last evening from someone who's a part of our community, and they've attended webinars, and we've spoken with the family, and they had a very strong plan, and I'm not going to complain, and everything is going to be fine. And within days of surrendering, reaching out to us and the family with endless complaints. And for example, I think in this case, without getting into the name, he was complaining about the food. And then when he was getting food, he said the food didn't taste very good. And I want you to have good food there. You're not going to starve, I promise. And I share this with you because it's making the experience harder on his family, on his wife, on his children, when that first call home is an endless supply of complaints. It just makes it harder on them. So Sam, Scott, Nate, let me ask you if you'll unmute yourself. There are aspects of this experience that are uncomfortable. What were some things as you got to prison that frustrated you from staff? I just want to jump in and have a little dialogue because I want to condition people for disappointment. And some of you may say, Justin, shut up. You served a measly 388 days in one camp. That's true. But I saw people do it for a long period. Larry did it for 10 years. Michael did it for 26 years. You can dismiss my measly year. I don't care. But I saw people with very long sentences focusing on what they can control, not obsessing over what they could not control. I think that's the key takeaway from this message today. So Sam, what were some things that really sickened or frustrated you when you got to prison?
So there were two things. So I'm a slight guy. I don't have a lot of body fat. And I get cold at night, and my bed was underneath an air conditioning bed. So I had two blankets. I didn't think that was a major problem. In the middle of the night, all of a sudden, a guard with a flashlight right in my eyes rips both of my blankets off and throws them on the floor. First of all, I jumped up. I didn't know what was happening. And I said, what happened? He said, you're only allowed one blanket. I said, why? I said, I'm cold. I was given a second blanket. Sorry, one blanket, and I'm taking the other blanket. So next morning I had to go to another guard and said, I told him what happened. He said, here's both blankets back. Then I guess a couple of days later in the chow hall, we had bananas for breakfast. You get fresh fruit for breakfast. I wasn't hungry. So I brought my banana out with me back to the unit. I was in the RDAP unit. And of course they had a inspection of the unit. And when they opened my locker, one of the RDAP teachers or instructors found the banana. Well, actually, this happened 2 days before I was scheduled to graduate. And I guess an hour or two later, I hear my name paged over the loudspeaker. Mangle, we found a banana in your locker. Get to the RDAP building. Now, this is in front of 400 inmates. They paged me saying that. Okay, I went to the RDAP unit. All I'm thinking is, I'm gonna get kicked out 2 days before graduation. And I walked in, and so you're assigned an individual counselor. My counselor said, I heard they found a banana in your locker. I said, yeah. I said, I'm an older guy. I like to have a little bit more potassium. So yes, I had it. I own it. She said,
So
you didn't follow the rules. I'll give you a warning list. Silly things like that. You have to understand the mentality of the people you're dealing with.
that's it. When I hear banana, by the way, I think of Banana in the Tailpipe from Beverly Hills Cop. Little levity on this Friday morning. It's okay to laugh every now and again. Okay, please. I know we're going to prison, but we're going to get through it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's Sam shared those. Now, what Sam didn't do, because I know his wife, he didn't call home and start complaining. Oh my God, I don't. He knew this is harder on the wife and kids. So to the extent that he could just manage it and not complain, I think that's a good idea. Because as you prepare for prison, I'd like you to think about that first phone call home. And my friend Seth Ferrenti, who served like 20 years in federal prison, used to say, you kind of have to fake it to make it in those initial days and weeks and months in prison. So we don't want to encourage you to lie, but when you make that first call home, you're going to be angry that you're there. You don't think you should be there. I understand it, frustrated. They're waiting for that phone to ring, and they're really going to be anxious to hear what you have to say. So I encourage you to communicate the right message. Remember, there are aspects of this experience that will be uncomfortable. It is prison after all, but we're not in a Russian gulag, thankfully. It's going to be okay. I want you to manage their expectations, but also manage your own, because when someone says, I'm not getting enough food and the food I'm eating is terrible, help me. Here's the help. There are aspects of this experience that are uncomfortable. Embrace it, endure it. You're going to be home soon. And I don't want to be flippant about it, but it's true. Scott, how about you? When you got to the camp, were there a few things as you prepared for prison that shocked you once you got there?
Yeah, definitely. Hearing Sam tell his story was interesting for me because when I first got there and things like that happened, I was just flippant about it. I was livid. And then after I had been there for a year, you actually laugh about it. You're like, yeah, I was sleeping. I had 2 blankets. They ripped them both off and threw them on the floor. What was I thinking? The big takeaway for me is you are just a number to the staff. You're a file. You need to be fed. You need to be counted. There's no fighting. Those to me were the top 3 priorities. They're not putting chocolate mints on your pillow. You're not going to be exceptionally comfortable. But on the flip side, there are a lot of aspects of the experience that you can grow to appreciate and find joy in. And for me, Justin, you said you were with guys that had done time for a long time. The people who are in a camp who have worked their way down from higher security institutions and been in prison for 10 or 15 years, you learn from them. You learn how they do time. You learn to not let the small stuff bother you, and you learn to appreciate the good things you have in there. And the time goes by much easier because every time you complain about anything, all it's doing is bringing you down.
I think that's right. Thank you. And that ties into things that I saw as well, where they would purposely, the water would be cold in the shower. They would do these fire drills at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning just for fun. And they'd get a kick out of the prisoner standing outside complaining about it, purposely extend the count time so guys will miss their getting back to Sunday football at 10 a.m. I mean, they're going to do these things in part for fun because they can. And as Scott said, in time, you'll just come to endure it, laugh at it, because you'll be focused on what you can and cannot control. But I really beg and encourage you to not bring it home any more than you need to via email, via phone, via a letter. And I know that's hard because we tend to share our frustrations with those we're closest, and that's probably your spouse or your kids, but understand what they're dealing with on the other line. So these are the things I want to convey to all of you as we go down this process. And it's hard to receive some of these emails and whatnot that come in, because it reminds me, maybe we could do a better job on the webinars, or better yet, continue to reinforce we cannot control how good or bad the food is going to be and things of that nature. And I always want to stress, again, you've got to watch the disciplinary infraction webinar or you're not prepared for prison. About 4 months ago, there's this myth in federal prison that if you go kosher, you're going to get more halfway house time because it's more expensive to do the kosher meal. So they're going to want to kick you out early. Sam, did you guys hear that in prison too? Did you guys hear that?
We heard that if you go kosher, and I did start out common fare, by the way.
Yeah.
You get more food, that you get allocated more holiday time. There were all sorts of crazy stories. A lot of the stories emanated around that Jews got more halfway house time as a religion. So yes, you hear all sorts of crazy stories.
I share this because about 4 months ago, someone was on the kosher menu. They went off the kosher menu Either they didn't like it, they didn't think that it would help them. They were in the chow hall. You have special food, you're on a list. A guard saw someone who used to be on the kosher menu take food from someone who was still on the kosher menu. They moved his bunk from what would be called Beverly Hills to East LA, as the guard would call it, directly in front of the toilet where you hear flushing and disgusting stuff taking place all night. And they threatened to take away his good time. Why? They said, you are not allowed to eat the kosher. The guard saw him. People are always watching. Okay. These are things that can really derail your experience, Okay. Now, as we transition into one moment, I want to get to our screen share. Actually, before I do that, Nate, did you have any experiences? Because Nate went in with children and a 33 months prison term. Nate, are there any things that really shocked or disgusted you once you got there that you just sort of had to, you said to yourself, I'm just going to have to endure. I've spent time with your wife. You guys flew out to see us from Tennessee. Tell us about that.
You know, what's in the idea that I come, what Scott and Sam said is what's important to me is not important to them. And I remember I got a call from my lawyer one time, and my attorney's like, really, from my wife, you've got to talk to your lawyer. You've got to talk to David. You've got to talk to your lawyer. And I'm like, okay, great. They're not going to let me make the call. They said, oh, they will. Go in there. The lawyer said to say this. And I went into the counselor and, said, hey, can I make the call? Well, there was a phone over there that everybody used. Nobody was on it. I mean, and he just looked at it and looked at me and he says, no, you got to put your name on a list. And I said, Mr. Johnson. And he said, Mr. Schott, put your name on the list. Now, this was a guy that I got along with. I mean, he was the counselor. He was probably about my age. I mean, he knew I wasn't causing any trouble, but it was just his day to mess with somebody. And actually, it would have been 2 weeks had he gone through the stuff. And eventually my lawyer just called me on the phone and, said, hey, this is so-and-so, this is privileged information and da-da-da-da-da. But it had to do with they wanted to bring me back and look at resentencing me because they found other stuff that was going to, in the positive way for my case, because of a certain FBI agent with what they found out that they didn't disclose to us. So I was like, I'm not coming back. I'm almost finished. This was like November. And the other time was, I think, just like you said, I always remember this. The first thing somebody said to me when I got there, a guy from Knoxville, Tennessee, he said, Doc, remember, somebody's always watching you and somebody's always listening to you. And that was a big thing because people think for some reason that if they tell things on you in there, that they're going to get something better or out of it. They're just not. They're going to get a bad reputation. And we even had guys get set up, with cell phones and the quote snitches, which they don't like that term. But as they do that, but people are watching you. And I was in RDAP and, it was the same kind of thing all the time, even down to the point one time I was looking at my locker, everything was closed. It was a 4 o'clock count. And, you're supposed to be looking straight out of your cell, while they can count you. Well, I had done that. Who knows how long I had done it. And one of the guards that, knew me. I really didn't talk to him that much, but it was like he called me out and wanted to write me up. And it was just a game to play, and like in RDAP, somebody hold him accountable, somebody help him up with that. And I'm like, you are kidding me. And, same thing. I'm 52. I didn't have any back problems, no health problems, but a top bunk. They were paying for bunks where I was. I'm like, I'm not paying for a bottom bunk. I can get up I could get up and down easily, but just those crazy things that go on. But just like you said, what's important to me was not important to them with the guards or the corrections officers, and just got to learn to live with it. And you keep your mouth closed and you keep moving on, but just know somebody's watching and somebody's listening to you, even if you think you're speaking quietly to somebody in your cell.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I wanted to open with that because it's inevitable that upon your surrender, at some point, you're going to be frustrated and angry. I recall it was a Tuesday in June at 11:30 in the morning, and I'm doing an AB class thinking, what the hell am I doing an AB class for in prison on a Tuesday when I should be home working? This is insane. You're going to feel that way. That's insane that you were there. Yep. We're sorry. It will end. We want you to keep that in mind. Now back to
Justin.
One quick story to tell. If you are on an upper bunk, by the way, and this kind of comes down to, we received a notice earlier this week, unfortunately, from someone in our community that a friend of theirs who wasn't in prison actually fell out of the top bunk, slipped while in Forest City, and I believe the person has since passed away. A young prisoner slipped from that upper bunk, from what I've read and from what I've heard. And that's tragic. And I will tell you, I mean, this upper bunk, the slab is this big. I'm telling you, it's tiny. So I preferred an upper bunk because I was younger. I like the open air up there. People couldn't come and sit on it. But if you do have an upper bunk, be careful getting up and down, because it is a tiny slab, and I slipped twice. I landed on my feet. But be very, very careful if you have an upper bunk. And coming back to the bunk, part of how you can secure yourself for a lower bunk, if you need a lower bunk, is making sure that if you have not yet sat for your probation report, that it reflects any issues, ailments, back, knee, legs, any problems that you have. That should be reflected in the probation report. If the report has been completed and you've already been sentenced and there are new ailments, it's a good idea to compile letters from physicians that support your argument. Recently, Larry and I worked on I think it was a redesignation or a delay of a surrender. One client had a letter from a doctor stating that he needed surgery. The judge approved it. The other judge denied it because there was no supporting evidence. The judge is like, you could be making this up. All right. The more evidence you have as you prepare your personal belongings as we transition to number 6, the better. Think about what you are going to need prior to your surrender and gather that right now. So as Michael wrote in this lesson plan, many of the local institutions will publish a commissary list. Now, you can go to bop.gov, go to your prison, look at the commissary list. You can spend some time allocating the $360. People have asked us to fill out a commissary list for them. It's like what we choose will be totally different from you. You should assess what it is you need, begin to form a budget. I'm of the opinion in the commissary, you should buy things that are 2 toothbrushes, a toiletry kit, because if you drop your toothbrush and you don't shop again, you're in trouble. So I wanted to get things that I knew I couldn't borrow from someone. I could get some granola, I could get a Diet Coke, I can get some wheat bread, but I'm not going to get ibuprofen from somebody else. That's a no-no. I'm not going to get a toothbrush. So really assess what's a requirement, but we're not in the best position to tell you if you should buy an MP3 player that first month or a Timex watch. You make that decision, okay? But I would encourage you to assess what it is you want to bring. We'd encourage you to spend time formulating a budget right now with your family, right? We discussed a little bit of this last week. We have a lot of rich people who like spending $100 a month. We have people with limited resources who find a way to spend $1,000 a month. I spent $500 in prison. That included my phone, email, commissary, and 3 books of stamps a week. Part of the reason budgets can move higher because people engage in the prison hustle. I think we should touch on the prison hustle a little bit today as you prepare for your surrender to prison. It's big business in prison. Some long-term prisoners sustain themselves by cleaning people's sheets, doing their laundry, doing their job, cooking their food, ironing their clothes. The prison hustle is alive and well, yet too many people engage in the hustle too quickly without understanding the environment. And there are consequences. I also think we should touch on iPhones and how pervasive they are in prison. With respect to what you can bring religious items such as a book of worship. Staff may authorize a person to wear a religious necklace, provided the necklace isn't flashy or worth more than $100. People who surrender to prison will encounter fewer problems if they do not attempt to bring more than necessary. So the religious items, a Bible, if you like. Now, there have been times that people have gone with a Bible, and I kid you not, even though it's allowed, they didn't allow it to bring it in. There are many of them in the library. Things like that can immediately be frustrating. Same thing with a wedding ring. A very assuming wedding ring, a guard didn't allow it, even though policy allows it. Just like the policy states that your family should immediately be approved to visit if they're listed in the probation report. Yet Scott, Nate, Sam, and me in prison saw a case manager say, I don't care if your wife's in the PSR, have her fill out the visitation forms, which could delay it 2 or 3 weeks because they do the background check. It's just part of the experience. Pick your battles. Now, some families who are listed in the probation report have showed up to visitation with their belongings, with money, with their ID, stating that the policy allows it. And in some cases they get in. We just want you to pick your battles wisely, because we don't want them to make it harder for you down the road if they feel like you're going against what they tell you. The takeaway is they do not always follow policy. In prison, I remember seeing a huge sign on the softball field that was ripped in half, hanging by a thread that said preparing offenders for reentry. There wasn't a whole lot of preparing taking place. So again, I just want you to understand this as you go down this road. Do not bring your pre-sentence report. Okay, it is not allowed. People bring this pre-sentence report thinking it's going to help them. Do not bring your probation report. If you are going to a low security prison, unfortunately, some older school convicts may ask you for your papers, may ask you for your pre-sentence report. I'd like to discuss that in a separate call if any of you are enduring that. But as Sam can attest, we recently had someone who is not an American citizen go to a low security prison for a very short period of time. And immediately upon his surrender, they asked him for his papers, which means his probation report, because they want to see if he cooperated. So if this, I've never seen this in a camp. I never saw, did you see that in a camp, Scott,
No.
Nate, or anyone? I did not see, okay. I did not see that in a camp, but if any of you are looking at time in a low security prison, and if you cooperated, you can potentially expect them to try to ask for your papers, and we should discuss how you're going to respond to that. Okay, we can do that at a separate time, but reach out to our team. So are there any questions based on what I've shared thus far? By the way, if questions come, please add them to chat. Our team will respond. Any questions thus far? Any hands popping up? Okay, as we come back to preparing to surrender, yes, you should get all of your medications in order. Surrender with a week or two of medications, in my opinion. You can go through the BOP formulary list with your physician to see what they may transition you to. Glenn from Arkansas, who was at every webinar, all of our webinars, discussed how he went through this process with his physician, so he'll have a better understanding. There is a chance medications you're taking, they may not even give you. So it's essential that you have a plan as you prepare for your surrender to prison. And a good way is to go to the BOP formulary list, something we encourage all of you to do. As we continue on to number 7, understanding these medical preparations, I know we just touched on it. They're the best time, in our opinion. You always want to be advocating for your early release via the First Step Act, the Second Chance Act, I understand it. But if medically you are not being treated, it's essential that you understand how to advocate for yourself, which is why we really encourage you to watch the subject matter interview with Hugh Hurwitz, the former director of the Bureau of Prisons. He talks at length about that. We'll resend that link to you if you like. But if there are health issues and you have concerns that you may not get treated in prison, you've got to advocate for yourself and understand how things can happen and how to respond to that. Now, some medical issues in prison are brought on by themselves. You bring them, you create them. And that in part leads to exercise in prison and fitness. Okay. So let's transition for a moment into what happens if you get hurt in prison and why people actually can get hurt and not get their medical needs met. Scott, when you were in prison, let's transition to you. What type of sports did you play? Like what recreational activities existed when you were in prison?
I played a lot of pickleball. I played a lot of handball. I lifted weights. Everyone would walk the track, push-ups, pull-ups, your stereotypical prison workouts. I didn't play basketball or softball. I know you guys have talked about this in the past. It's just, if you get hurt out there, you're not going to be pleased with the medical care. And it's a risk you have to decide if you want to take or not.
Sam, Nate, what did you do? What sports?
Yeah, I did tennis, pickleball. I did the track, ran, and then did calisthenics because they didn't have weights, but we were doing anything like that. And I think, like Scott said, the big thing I saw is not just getting hurt and getting the care, which was terrible. Guys would sit there and, whether it was fractures, breaks, or whatever. But when we were coming out, it was through the pandemic, and guys were put on medical holds and they didn't even know they were on a medical hold. And that medical hold stopped them from getting into the system until they got the medical hold off. And I had a couple of guys that went through RDAP with me that should have gone home a month or two after I did. And, they were 4 or 5 months later because they found out they had a medical hold going on. And when it goes back to advocating for yourself, if you don't do it, nobody else is going to. So
that I need all of you, just like last week, as we discussed preparing for prison jobs, we discussed you want a job that is an hour a day that allows maximum time to work on your new business, your career, to be productive, or do you want a job that's 10 hours a day to feel like you're not really in prison? Part of the reason people exercise so much beyond the enjoyment of it is it helps you feel like you're not in prison. In softball, when I was in prison, softball was 4 days a week, and that's that's a lot of softball. And this is off-putting to some people, but I wouldn't play softball 4 days a week unless you're going to be a professional softball player when you come home, I mean, once a week. But the point is, if you get hurt, you will never be the same, because you could lay there for hours before they take you to medical. If you're in a minimum security camp, it's like the stepchild. It's a satellite camp. They're small. They don't have the resources of a higher security prison. And it's very frustrating if you were to get hurt. I will also say I saw someone get written up for a disciplinary infraction because they said they couldn't do a specific job in the kitchen due to an injury, and they got out of that job, yet their case manager saw them playing tennis 4 days a week, and they felt as if they had been misled and lied to. So understand, if you tell staff you have a job, you have an injury or an ailment that precludes you from doing a certain job, like pots and pans or standing in the buffet line 3 days a week, fine, understand. And they will be watching if you're suddenly lifting weights and you look like, Arnold Schwarzenegger out there, which is what some people turn into in prison. I want you to be aware of that. Okay. They are always watching, as Nate, Sam, and we convey every single week. But I would like you to consider how frequently you're going to engage in sports. I ran around a dusty track at a slow pace. I wasn't going to get hurt. Softball, tennis, because you don't get hurt playing bocce ball, but these things can injure you and you're never quite the same. As we discussed preparing for prison, you have got to create a visitation list, and visitation is opening up now with COVID passing. Visitation, I learned in prison, is not always a great day, because it can be a day where you get some bad news, and it can be frustrating. So some tips on visitation as you prepare your list. They will do a background check on everyone that's going to visit you. It's essential that the person fill out the form completely, or they won't get approved. So I would work on that visitation list now. I did not send the list out until I went to prison. Some people send it before and have it filled out. Sam, did you do that? Or did anyone here do that? I just sent out the visitation. Go ahead.
The problem we saw, at least in Miami, was the visitation forms couldn't be sent back to you. They had to go directly back to the council. So while we would send them out pre-filled out to whomever we wanted to visit that was on the pre-sentence report, we had to instruct them, please do not send them back to us, send them to the counselor. And we had to give them the counselor's information, which is why I at least always tell people now, hold off on sending the forms back until you know who your loved one's counselor is, because usually they have to go directly back to the counselor.
Right. So fill out who you'd like to visit with. Notify them that upon your surrender, you are going to mail them a visitation form. It needs to go back, as Sam said, to the counselor, needs to be filled out honestly. If they have a criminal past, they can get approved. Probably unlikely if they're currently on probation. It's just essential that it's filled out honestly. Send it back. It may take a week or two for the counselor to approve it. There are times where the forms will just sit on the counselor's desk and she knows you're there staring at the forms like, will you please approve this? Will you please process this? I want to see my family and friends. Sometimes the forms may just sit there. Endure, embrace it. I'd encourage you, as you prepare for prison, to have one point of contact that's going to manage your visitation schedule. We discussed this last week in point number 1, right? Having one point of contact. You don't want to use all your phone minutes or be coordinating a million emails back and forth on core links with your schedule. Have someone coordinate who's going to visit with you. Now, when it comes to visitation, $20 or $30, I encourage people to bring in a Ziploc bag, 1s, 5s, and quarters. If Scott or Sam, you saw it differently, let me know, but usually 20 to 30 bucks or so, right, in a Ziploc bag, along with the person surrendering with their ID. Cannot bring in an iPhone. No notes, though, of course, some people occasionally do break out some notes and do things like that. But $20 to $30 is what we brought. When your loved ones get into the visitation, you will get paged down to camp control. During that window, your loved ones can go to the incredible vending food cuisine and get you the cheesecake and Diet Coke and burrito, whatever it is you want, while they're waiting for you.
They'll be glad they did, Justin.
Yeah, because they empty quickly. These vending machines can empty quickly. So they can get some things that you like. Now, my mom, the greatest in the world, she is a gossiper. And I call her the godmother of white collar crime. She's fascinated with what everyone does that gets them into trouble. I say this because I wasn't prepared for prison. She would get in there before me and she would strike up a conversation with someone. Oh, who are you waiting for? What is he here for? It's like, no.
That's my grandmother and my mom.
Yeah, don't do that. So I encourage you, once your family gets there, just have them sit there quietly until you come down. I wouldn't strike up conversation because again, visitation can be a place where you get some bad, where the loved one may deliver some bad news, or the prisoner may develop some bad news, deliver some bad news. It's a tough experience. Scott or Sam, could you want to, or Nate, touch on the preparing? You prepare your family well for visitation? Just tell us a little bit about what you saw on the inside.
I'll tell you. Go ahead, Sam.
When my wife would come on Friday nights, either Saturday or Sunday, it was great. It was the highlight of my week. And you're able to touch, hold, kiss. I mean, short of a conjugal visit, it's a very, very nice thing. There's a little picnic area outside. Miami camp was a little interesting, and it gets back also to disciplinary. At the camp in Miami for visits, you were allowed to take the food from the vending machine if it wasn't eaten, yogurts, turkey legs, juice, back to your locker and dorm with you. So you were actually allowed to take it out. However, when there was a new guard one time, everybody was so used to taking it out, everybody carried bags of it out with them, and that guard gave everybody disciplinary infraction. So I tell everybody, when you're going to go there, you're going to see very unusual things. Follow the rules as far as that food goes, because it can get you in a lot of trouble. But there's no question, the visits are the highlight of your week.
And before I turn it over to Scott, this comes back to the importance of forming the right friendships and the people with whom you associate. And unfortunately, in prison, they kind of punish everyone if somebody does something wrong. For example, like if the microwave isn't cleaned well, they may punish everyone and remove the microwave from everyone for a week. And one time in visitation, unfortunately, a prisoner got a little too aggressive with, he was too affectionate with his wife, too much touching. And the guard shut down the visit and then shut down everyone else's visit. And it's like, imagine that, the effort that people went through to get there, and this one prisoner making this really bad decision because he couldn't keep his hands to himself. But what also happened is this guy had a lot of friends, and people suddenly didn't want to associate with him because this happened. That comes back to letting friendships form organically, not feeling compelled to spend time with someone if you don't want to, kind of like what we teach our children. Just say, no, I'm good. You can tell someone how long you're in prison, but you don't have to get into the details of why you're there, because then they're going to want to tell you the story. And I made that mistake early. Someone said, how long are you here? I told them why. And they're like, great, let me tell you my story. And it's like, oh no, for 4.5 hours, I spent my first afternoon in prison walking the track with someone telling me how Fountainhead from Ayn Rand is really based on his life, or Atlas Shrugged. He's the entrepreneur. He shouldn't be, oh my goodness, how did I have to listen to this? This is awful. Be very careful, study and think, watch, don't assert your authority. And that comes down to visitation. Sit there, don't introduce other people to your family and friends. They may do it, you shouldn't. And I will say to visitation, your family will know pretty quickly if you're being productive while in prison, because you can kind of fake it when you call home, even when you send an email. But when they visit with you, they're going to see if you're productive. They're going to see if you're having a good experience. They're going to see if you're making good use of your time. And there are times our team will get a call from a wife that will say, I ain't going back for 6 months. It's too much work to get there. I flew there, stayed in a terrible rundown motel, and I got there and he's angry. And all he does is talk about himself. He's tan, he's lost weight, he's working on his book, he's having the time of his life, and I'm angry and I'm not going back because he's not focused on me and I'm taking care of the family. These things happen. They happen. It's very easy in prison. You are going to get into better shape. You spend so much time alone. Dare I say, some days are kind of fun, but it's harder on your family. And when we get those calls from wives that say, I ain't going back because it's all about him, or all he does is complain, I'm not going back. I've had enough. I want you to think about this as you begin your visits and in every message that you convey when you call home. I'm absolutely begging you. Let's continue on, okay, as we talk about our top 10 list. Develop personal communication and success plan. Now, I mean, this we could talk about for months and weeks, and essentially we have. People that anticipate surrendering to prison should take the crucial step of building a strong communication system and plan. If a person doesn't know or understand how the system operates, they have a hard time planning. As a result, the people that love them and the people they love struggle with unnecessary worry. First, a person should understand the basics. Administrators will authorize most people in prison to communicate with people beyond prison boundaries in one of a few ways. Send and receive letters through the postal service, provided the person adheres to procedures. The phone, visitation we just discussed. Readers should note the qualifying language in the 4 points. Administrators can place limitations or restrictions on people. They might prohibit access to communications if there's a specific type of crime. A consequence of a disciplinary infraction could be taking away the phone or email, even loss of commissary, except for basic or indigent items that you're allowed to purchase. A day or two before surrendering the prison, you should print out the page and send it to yourself at the address. So as you form your contact list, I surrendered with mine, name, first name, last name, email address, mailing address, phone number if you're going to call them. Surrender with it. You can also put it in the mail that morning. If they don't let you take it in, you'll get it at mail call the next day. But you do want to have a contact list in our opinion. Okay. The more time you spend learning about the various communication systems, the better you will understand how communications in prison differ from communications outside of prison. So Scott, when you got to prison, or Sam, how long until you had access to email and phone?
For me, I had to quarantine. I was up in quarantine for 20 days. So by the time I got access to phone was maybe 2 or 3 days after that. Same with email. But depending on the facility you're at, if you don't have to quarantine and you don't report on a Friday, you self-surrender on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you should have access to phone and email within, I'd say, 48 hours probably.
Sam, how about you?
So if you remember, I reported too late in the day on a Friday. They put me in the shoe until Monday because I inconvenienced them. When I got out on Monday, my counselor gave me a PAC number. So everybody needs to know that in order to use a phone and email, there's 2 numbers you have to have, and you'll remember all of them. Your 8-digit BOP number, and you'll be assigned a 9-digit PAC number. Once you're assigned that PAC number, you can use email and phone. So it took me about 24 hours from getting out of the shoe.
I would say exactly remember that. I had access that evening when I got there. I had to surrender by 2 o'clock. I did it by 11, but that afternoon, they were supposed to give me a piece of paper on entry that had that PAC number, like Sam said. And again, thanks to you guys, one of the guys that that welcomed me in had gone through the program, and you guys contacted him, but he said, oh, the phones are easy, but you have to have your PAC number. So it took me 2 days on the phones. I got right in on email though, just because I finally went up to the entry and said, hey, we forgot to give you this piece of paper. And the guy that I had contacted, who was an inmate, was just, I don't know why it's not working. You can use mine. Don't use theirs. Use your own PAC number. Don't call on anybody else's number. They're recording everything. So, but anyway, I had it, Justin, I would have had it that night by the phone, but 2 days later.
So we've had clients or people in our community in quarantine email within a day or so. In some cases, like Scott, it took several weeks. We are big proponents of managing expectations. So I would let your family know it could be some time before I have access to email or phone. And then they are pleasantly surprised if they hear from you within a day or 2 or 3, kind of like when you were sentenced. I believe people should manage their family's expectations. Like, this is the guideline range. I may get the high end of the guideline range, and anything that's lower is a blessing. The worst is when someone expects probation, they get 2 years when the guidelines were 5 years, and they're devastated to 2 years when they should be celebrating and having a party. Manage expectations for your family properly with how quickly you'll email, how quickly you'll call home. When I got to prison, there was no email. I went to the library, piece of paper, someone lent me a stamp. I wrote a very long letter home, regretted some of what I put in that letter because I was doing a little bit too much complaining, in my opinion, like I shouldn't be here. I immediately regretted that when I dropped that in the mail slot. But you can communicate pretty quickly. Do not use other people's phone minutes as they just discussed. As we talk about communications in prison, I think we have to talk about the iPhone subject, because there have been people who said to me, Justin, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to get into trouble. Please. And as we all know, how many of you watching or on this webinar imagined at some point you'd become immersed in a government investigation? 0. Yet everyone says, I'm not going to make bad decisions. And every now and again, we get calls from people who have made bad decisions. So since Sam and Scott and Nate were really in prison during the iPhone era, I was not. How big of a problem is the iPhone problem, including, isn't staff responsible for bringing some of these in because it's a way to enhance their income? Can we talk about that for a moment? Because it's a huge problem.
For me,
go ahead.
For me, it was a non-starter issue. I think everyone knows to avoid it, but you can avoid it 99 times out of 100. However, you do it that once and they catch that phone and they find a number on it that they tagged to you through your phone call list, you're done. One day they page you over the intercom and you're shipped. You're out of there. You're out of RDAP. You can lose good time. I think it's best to just stay away from those conversations as well. A lot of people in prison ask a lot of questions and talk a lot. Oh, who's good? It's like, don't have any conversations ever to even to do with the phone.
Are the iPhones so obvious where you'll just like see a dude walking on the track on the iPhone? Are some people that open about it, or are
My camp was not, but we had guys come from other facilities who would say, at night, if you're in a cold sleeping room with 50 bunks, 25 of them have a glowing blue light. So it really depends on where you're at. But
Yeah.
to me, the risk is so far beyond not worth the reward.
I
I
tell
didn't touch one the entire time.
I tell people, you might want to think twice about getting an MP3 player because the same chargers that are used for the MP3 player are used for guys' cell phones. And it used to be a point of these chargers are next to the guard station. They're everywhere. Guys charge their cell phones, and it gets very contentious if you simply want to plug in a legal MP3 player and somebody has their cell phone being charged, that you could get into a bit of a conflict. In Miami, if I was in a unit of 75 guys, there were probably 45 phones, iPads. They were everywhere. I know my wife said to me, the first time I call and it's not from a prison phone, she will never accept a call from me or come visit. So if that wasn't enough incentive to stay away from phones, I don't know what is.
Sam, my wife said the same thing. I mean, I got visits. I like the visits because I got them a lot, but we saw them. Stay away from them. Here's the other issue. If you guys are going into RDAP, they have things what they call you're helping somebody up. And when you help them up, if you know about things, criminal behavior or anything that's going on, it's going to help that person be a better person. You're required to help them up. So like Scott said, you see the stuff, it's even better not to see it, because if you see it and you don't tell it and you're in RDAP, they bring you in. And then I've seen guys get rolled back 3 months for not reporting stuff that they knew. I mean, it's a crazy system. Stay away from that cell phone. I mean, it's the craziest thing. We even had a guy get set up. I mean, I'm sure several happened, but because where I was FPC Montgomery. We worked on the Air Force Base if you wanted to, if you had the job like that. But a lot of times, they're not guards that are your bosses, and they're contracted. Well, a lot of times those bosses, their spouses will send cookies or pizza. Well, you're technically not supposed to have that. But don't tell me a guy in Montgomery, Alabama, in the middle of the heat, that gets a piece of pizza, is not going to eat it. Well, guys do. Well, one guy went back and started complaining about it, that, hey, you guys need to check on this, because he got changed at the last minute on his job that he had on the compound, Justin. He was doing what, like you would say, prepare for it. Well, they shake things up all the time. And you just have to go back and put yourself in the right position again and get back to where you want to. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Those guys set him up, and it was a big setup. Had to do with a cell phone. He got shipped, lost good time. I mean, crazy stuff. And it just, you think you won't do it, but here's your problem. You get comfortable. I only served 10 months. I caught myself and I was doing RDAP. You're thinking, oh, I could do that. Not with iPhones, but little stuff. But that's that criminal, that's that thinking that gets us in trouble. Don't do it. I mean, stay away from it. You get out. You go, just like Sam said. I mean, my wife was like, you do this, and I'm not coming ever again. You just stay there.
That's the right message. And that comes back to having people in your network hold you accountable. And the only way they can hold you accountable is if they know what you plan to do while you're in prison, which is why sometimes visitations can be difficult, because a family member may say, you said you were going to do this. You've been here 3 months. You haven't. Mm-hmm. So no, I just got here. I'm getting settled. And by then the prisoner will never begin. So this is harder on those that love and support you. We encourage you with every decision you make to remember that, and then create a communication plan that's commensurate with what it is you hope to do while you're away. I want to spend a minute as we talk about communications and ways to do it. I'm not going to go through this at great length, but here's Scott's website. Okay, Scott, while he was in custody, and you could have a website made with our team or have it made on Fiverr for $12, as long as it has the right message. As long as you're conveying the right message to your network, to your probation officer, to your judge, because some of you are going to want to get off probation early someday. And as the judges told us, they expect you to tell them one thing at sentencing and there'll be no follow through. So how persuasive are you if you say something at sentencing and then you actually do it? So this work, Scott will someday share with his judge, with his probation officer. This is what I did while I was in prison. This was my release plan. So I encourage all of you, whether it's a website like Scott did, here are his lesson plans, some of the 50 book reports that he wrote. I mean, this is incredible. This is impressive. This is a deliberate adjustment through prison. And I can assure you his family was proud of him. They have things to discuss during a visitation. Because if you don't have things to discuss, this is what happens after about 90 minutes in a visit. Great to see you. I guess not a whole lot else to talk about. I guess I'll call you later to confirm you got home safely. You need things to discuss. So create this communication plan, a website, book reports via core links every single week. And if you can do that, the time passes. You won't be so obsessed over, I got 3 months in a halfway house versus 4. I know you all want it. These are things you've got to manage with your family now, and also do it in a way that is consistent with what you can actually do. Joseph, for example, in his release plan, and you should all be creating your release plan, of course, Joseph wrote that he's going to write 500 words a day. That's a big task, and he's committed to it. 500 words a day isn't that much, I guess, but he can only write 500 words a day if he's reading books that allow him to create content. I started reading this book, really good, The Daily Laws by Robert Greene, 1 lesson a day. Pretty cool. He's the one that wrote 48 Laws of Power. I spend 3 minutes a day reading this. Creates tons of content that you'll see in TikTok and YouTube videos, podcasts that we create. You need to do the same thing. So as you prepare your belongings, your visitation list, what visitation is going to be like, what books you're going to read, share your Amazon book list with people so they can send you books. You've got to create that re-entry plan that is going to demonstrate to your family and network what it is you plan to do all day. Because if you have a job like some people find that's 15 minutes a day, you have a whole lot of time to work on your goals. But unfortunately, in some cases, it can literally feel like a million years. Okay. Any questions as I continue? I want to transition to number 9 on our checklist. Any questions?
Hey, Justin, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Scott, the site that he just showed, did you built that while you were in prison? You made that site while you were locked up?
No. With Justin's help, I had made it before I went in. But what I would do was I would write posts just through core links. So it was in essence just an email, and then someone would help me and post it to the website.
Oh, so you sent it to an outside person and then they posted it from core link? Okay.
Correct.
That's the beauty of it, right? You read a book, part of your communication and reentry plan. Why did you read the book? How is it helping you in prison, and how will it help you upon your release? You send it via core links. We have it. It takes about an hour for the email to go through to clear security, an hour on both ends. Someone on our team, or if you have a family member that does it, copy and paste the blog, boom, the whole thing can be done inside of an hour and create a little image around it. Scott was able to share that work with his case manager, with his probation officer. Scott's in the halfway house right now. He'll be done with the BOP next month, but he has liberty more than I think he expected, in part because he's able to show this work. It's like, just don't tell them, show them. So whether it's a website or weekly communication, you want to build a record, right? It's like, a lot of people, everyone says they want to write a book, or a lot of people it's very hard to sit down and write a book. But imagine if you just wrote a few hundred words a day, you wake up after a month, you have a little book that you can publish and give to your family, give to a probation officer. It's kind of that old slow and steady wins the race. You write a little bit every day, before you know it, you got a book. That's what I saw Michael do in prison. When he wrote Earning Freedom, a book that all of you should read and we've sent you at no cost, it was a 150,000 word book the dude wrote in 6 weeks. And I'm like, how can you do that? He's like, it's pretty easy. You just write 2,000 words a day, and then you do it every day. And before you know it, you have a book that is in front of hundreds of thousands of people in prison. Now, that might sound simple because he spent more than 20 years honing this craft. The point is, you can spend 20 minutes a day writing to your network, or build it up over 7 days and then send it out every week via mail, email, website, whatever it may be. Only then are you crushing and thriving while in prison. And then, of course, you can share this work with your with your case manager, which is great because you want them to see it, because there is a Bureau of Prisons policy that allows the writing of manuscripts, presuming it doesn't get in the way of your job. People have run businesses literally by putting the whole thing online for the world to see because they're writing their blog or their manuscript. It's important that you understand policy, as you're going through this warped process. Okay. As we transition to number 9,
Justin, can I say one thing
Yes.
about all the business stuff? We still had a business my wife took over and ran. The time that we spoke about it and did a lot of stuff, I mean, I read books with my kids. They'd come, we'd talk about it. That's so important because you're going to say the same thing over and over again, and they're going to get sick of it. So you got to get something going. But I'll tell you, that was when we spoke a lot about it, and they would let us write stuff while we were in there if we had the paper, and they could take it out. And they weren't monitoring, but you cannot really get on the phone and trade stocks or move money. I mean, that is a no-no. They say it, but don't do it. So, and one more thing I would tell everybody about communication with preparing. Something we found, we were in there during the lockdowns, and it was a really good thing. My wife had made several friends with a lot of the other wives that came to visit. And then if something happened to me in there or somebody else, they don't just call the spouse. So if I knew about it and something happened to say it was Larry, but I could get a message to Larry's wife through my wife and say, hey, this is what's going on. When we had all that lockdown, remember, and First Step, everybody thought was coming along, and that's when I was in there, they knew more about what was going on in each of our dorms than we did because we weren't talking to each other, the guys. So I'm just saying, if you can make that network too, and if you can prepare for the best possible outcome, that's one thing that stuck with me. Justin said it, Michael Santos say it. I know Sam says it. They all say it. Prepare, 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 because you're going to get the least amount of care that you're going to get on anything there. They're just getting you through. So I didn't mean to take up the time.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I see some hands coming up. Let me address this and then I'll go to the hand. The quadrant theory, touched on it last week briefly, want to go over it again. I've joked sometimes I avoided Michael Santos in prison because I didn't want to justify my day to him because I had too much fun. And but sometimes he would ask me, and he taught a terrific class behind the shed, and he would go through this quadrant theory, and he'd call on somebody and say, let's go over your last 24 hours in prison. And it can be humbling or inspiring. Mm-hmm. And from there, we would break down, do you think that behavior fall into a high risk, high reward, low risk, high reward, and so on. And the great thing about this is it's very subjective. What I think could be high risk, low reward, you may see totally differently. So let's spend a couple of minutes going through, for example, some decisions that can be considered high risk, low reward. Okay. Certainly, contraband could be considered high risk, low reward. I've argued with some people who say that we would argue watching television is high risk, low reward. They're like, I disagree with that. Of course, it can be low reward and high risk because a lot of trouble happens inside of the TV room. Okay. Ideas of low risk, low reward, sleeping all day, watching TV all day can fall back into that category. Okay. So let me actually pull this up right here. So can anyone give some insights to, for example, like low risk, low reward, Scott, Sam, Nate, anything like that for these quadrants that you may disagree with? For example, high risk, high reward. This is something I used to discuss with Michael. It's very high reward to publish and write books, to do business development, but there's also a little bit of higher risk because it could put you in front of staff. They can see the blog, they can see the website, they can read the book and whatnot. But for some of you, if you need to rebuild and make money and start a new career, you may assess that's a risk I'm willing to take. A number of people say, I want to be an ideal inmate. Michael Santos would say, I don't want to be an ideal inmate. I don't even really know what that means. I want to prepare for life on the other side. An ideal inmate for staff could be just watching TV all day or sitting in the library reading, not bringing any attention to yourself. So be careful when you say, I want to be an ideal inmate. What exactly does that mean? These are decisions you've got to give thought to right now before you go in, because too many make decisions that fall in and they avoid problems, but they kind of fall into the low risk, low reward. They lay low, they avoid, really putting themselves out there and communicating, and they don't get into any trouble, but they come home and they reach out to us and they're really struggling. So before I transition to number 10, Does anyone have any insights or thoughts on this sort of quadrant theory in the decision-making aspect or what you saw?
Yeah, if you are in RDAP, you just make sure your story is your story, guys. And don't go publishing something opposite of what you are saying or doing. And especially ownership of your sentence, like RDAP, especially, you know, guys will say, oh, I caught my sentence, or the judge gave me this. RDAP, I earned 33 months. I mean, stuff like that. And it's a big deal. So again, Sam may have some comments on that, but I mean, I agree with all of the quadrants you have. I think they're perfect and dead on. You know, low risk, low reward is that sleeping and curled up on your bunk and not doing anything. I mean, you're gonna come home, guys. I know it's we're going through the worst thing. I remember Justin met me then. You know, it's just but you're gonna be home. Use this time. You won't have it again.
I thank you. And I'm going to share the last point and then go to questions. I see the hand. And step 10, engineering your release plan. And Michael wrote this several months ago. And probably if he were to rewrite it, he would probably take number 10 of engineer your release plan and make this number 1, because it's so crucial. We did a full webinar 2 weeks ago or last week only on the release plan and creating it now before you surrender, because in light of the First Step Act and opportunities for an earlier release, you position yourself for a potential earlier release and to get more of what you want, which is a productive journey and trying to get out of there a little bit earlier. So we have shared with you Michael Santos's release plan. Joseph
Justin,
DiGregorio.
The
It's
screen
blank.
is blank. I don't know if.
Oh, sorry about that. One moment. Okay, so forgive me. One moment. Thank you. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
So Joseph DiGregorio was kind enough to let us share his release plan. We just removed some personal information, of course. If you'd like to see the plan that Joseph spent a whole lot of time on, we'll share it. Just send us an email. You're getting a whole lot of emails from us. But you want to continue to build this release plan now, knowing it's going to grow in prison. And in Michael's case, these are questions that he asked himself. And you could very easily modify this and answer these questions for your family, for your blog, for your website, for your case manager, for your probation officer, with whom you should be writing letters to in prison. I think next week we're going to touch on preparing for probation while in prison, even before you get sentenced, how you can begin preparing for probation, including asking and answering questions like Michael would ask and answer. In what ways would serving multiple decades in prison complicate my future? How would the prison system influence the way I communicated? How will the world change while I served my sentence? He would ask and answer these questions and share them with his network, with the world, with staff, because it showed that he was preparing for life on the other side. These are things you need to do right now. Asking these questions, Michael wrote, helped him form an adjustment plan. The plan would empower me through prison, keeping me on track as the weeks turned into months, the months turned into years, and the years turned into decades. What questions can you start asking now to engineer your release plan? That's the last thing I'll say before I answer the questions. As a result of your conviction, you may have lost your licenses, your reputation, your money. There is a long road ahead of you. And if you don't begin to answer these questions now and share them with the world, you position yourselves to come home and say, wow, my probation officer didn't approve my job, or they want me to clean toilets in the halfway house. I'd rather be back in prison. Without compelling content in this release plan, you're missing opportunities. And what can happen in some cases is the little time you serve in a minimum security camp ends up becoming a much longer prison sentence on the other side. And we encourage you to begin formulating this plan now. And we've shared templates with you. But lastly, don't fill in garbage in the template. Don't say you're going to do something and then not do it, because staff and your family will absolutely know. That said, let me turn it over to some questions. Dusko, your hand's been up. Thank you. You can unmute yourself and ask away, please. You're still on mute. You're still on mute. I just asked to unmute you. Let me.
Is this okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everything. I am in home confinement. I served 10 months out of 24-month sentence, and I cannot emphasize how much I appreciate your seminars, because I did not attend them or learn until obviously I came out. So I urge everybody to, quite frankly, before going in, really pay attention to every detail. There are 3 impressions that I want to try to emphasize for everybody going in. One was that there is a lot of lack of information or misinformation as you go in, as you have probably heard, and I made 3 mistakes. one mistake was that I deposited too much money for my commissary once I came into the prison thinking that I don't want to be sending money every month. It was a mistake. You probably addressed it before, but if you owe money on restitution, they have a right to take it out, and there are different institutions that use different rules. But minimum is what I have learned later on, because they have something called FRP, which is if you make appeal for the FRP, it's not really appeal, it's a refusal. And that precludes you from having your credits counted in the future. I appealed because the judge specified 10% restitution, while actually he did not, or my attorneys at the time did not specify specifically whether it is after release or prior to release. So I guess what I'm trying to say, ignorance in this way, from my point, I paid a penalty. Second mistake was that I was not aware of something called Spark 13, or we were not given this self-evaluation test for a pattern score, and that also immediately disqualifies you from earning credits. Minor item at the time, ignorance on my part, not knowing, not being informed, but nonetheless, I guess objective is try to do the best you can and get out as fast as you can, but all I'm doing is forewarning once to really pay attention to these minor details, because they can cost you later on. And the final one is obviously with the First Step Act, which you discussed, whether one qualifies if it's 18 months to the door or not. And there is still a gray area there because we are in this transitionary period, how they assign the credits. So it's three things that maybe you can emphasize or try to help everybody before they surrender, because it's obviously going to be on everybody's mind. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing those insights. Excuse me. I'm going to touch on some of them tomorrow, including, by the way, everyone, Sam and I are going to do a demonstration tomorrow with our calculator to help you understand early release, how long you may serve. We're going to do that tomorrow. To his point, I want to convey, and this happened on a call earlier today, even if the judge says you pay X amount in restitution when you come home, and you pay whatever they tell you to pay in prison, do not negotiate your FRP. Just pay it, because it could really work against you, even if you have a right to pay less. Just like your family has a right to get approved for visitation without filling out the forms. Don't complain. You just want to win the war here, okay? Don't negotiate, just pay it. And to the idea, yes, of surrendering with too much money, we got that email earlier today, Sam, or I got an email from someone that they surrendered, I think they went with like $6,000 or something, and they took like almost all of it, for their restitution, and now they have very little left. They're saying you want to think about those things, how much you bring, and don't complain when they tell you to take money. And we're going to thank you. We're going to touch more on this tomorrow. Jonathan, your question, Jonathan.
Yes,
Yes.
Yep, thank you. So if I used a personal narrative for my sentencing, and also character reference letters, where on the release plan should those go, and should they be attached to the release plan right away, or should I add them down the road?
So thank you. Great question. So the release plan is a evolving document, and at times you might want to convey a different message. For example, you may convey a different message to a sentencing judge than you do to a case manager. So what you can do with your narrative, perhaps because I know it's 7 or 8 pages, we worked on it. You want to update it, right? You can take the whole narrative and you can update it with what you've done since sentencing. So you can either share the whole narrative, attach it to part of your release plan. You can modify portions of it to remove some information that may not be is relevant. We can do a whole lot of things with it. But if you do have a sentencing narrative, and in many cases it's helped you get a shorter sentence, it should already be in your probation report. By the way, if any of you have not been sentenced, make sure your narrative is in your probation report.
Mine is in my probation report.
So that's a great thing. So your case manager in prison is going to see your probation report and your narrative, right? So you can take that same narrative, make it part of your reentry plan, and then update it. No downside to that, because it has the right message. I'm sorry, I accept responsibility, I'm making amends, and this is my plan moving forward. The hallmark of a good sentencing narrative. So sure, we can attach the whole narrative and put it in there, but we want to continue to show what have you done since you've been in prison, right? And that the programming, it's not just, hi, I attended a parenting class. This is what I learned from this parenting class. I'm not just reading books. Here's my book report. It's just going to grow and evolve from 7 pages. It could be 700 pages before you're done. And yes, a lawyer earlier this week said to me, no case manager is going to read 700 pages. And I said, maybe not. They can flip through it and see that the person did it. But we're really not just doing it for the case manager, Mr. Lawyer. Do you know who we're doing it for? We're doing it for the potential employer we're asking for a job. That's why we're doing and creating this content in the messaging. It's not just for a bureaucrat who may or may not read it. It's for the people like that Nate Schott wants to meet now that he's home from prison as he grows his marketing and dental practice. That's the reason he did the work. It's not just for a case manager that may throw it in the trash. Just do it. Just build it. Just grow it. Because they may not have commented extensively on Scott Laney's website, but I can assure you people who are home now and he runs into people are like, wow, I can't believe what you did in prison. That's inspiring. Tell me more about it. I'm so impressed. Think 10, 20, 30 years out. Okay. I see a hand up here for Summer, please. Hi, thank you for joining us.
Hi, I have a couple questions. One of them is on if you're going to a low security prison, on the paperwork, you spoke of that. If somebody asks that, what do you say? Or
what I want to do, Sam, I know Michael wrote a response to this earlier in the week. If you're prepared to answer that, if not, Summer, we'll send you a separate email because I was not in a low security prison. Michael was for 10 years. So Sam, do you recall how Michael addressed that? If not, we'll respond to you separately.
So Summer, I'm very familiar with the situation. So
okay.
Yes, I'll talk to Summer offline because we've been working together and with Mark, and I'll get you that information.
okay, and then another question is, if there is still state charges pending and he has a self-surrender date and his court date is set for after he self-surrenders, will they still do his court date while he's in the federal prison by teleprompter or something, or how does that work?
Larry, what do you think?
I'm
on mute.
Larry,
I'm on mute. Sorry about that.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that, I haven't come across against yet. So I don't know that I really have insight onto that.
Can you ask the question one more time? The question is, can you ask it one more time, Summer?
Yes, he has his self-surrender date for federal, but he has a state probation violation court hearing scheduled, and it's scheduled after his surrender date. So will they do the court date while he's in prison?
Okay. Yeah, they do make, I'm sorry, I didn't exactly understand. I'm glad you repeated it. They do make accommodations for people to be heard by phone in many instances. I know that I had many people who I was with who had issues, for example, with court dates they needed to appear for in custody hearings with respect to divorce. And the judges in state courts have in every instance been accommodating to allow for a phone appearance in those instances.
Yes, and also keep in mind, if any of you are doing the drug program, you need to have all of these any state issues or detainers removed. Having an outstanding case could compel them to send you to a low security prison instead of a camp. Also, make sure you go through great detail the probation report with your lawyer, because sometimes there are very old charges there or things pop up that can compel the Bureau of Prisons to designate you to the wrong facility, or many times people learn about it when it gets pulled up. And family members are scrambling to try to get paperwork from a local county sheriff from 25 years ago to get the case resolved so their loved one can get into RDAP. This is all part of preparing to surrender to prison. Make sure the cases are closed, or if there is an outstanding case, you're working to get it resolved. Potentially, he could delay his self-surrender. We've had this where delay the self-surrender so that other case can be closed. Summer, perhaps try to advance that. I'm not a lawyer, so I want to be careful here, but we don't want him to go to prison and get pulled out or not get into the right programs because he's got this outstanding case. So perhaps the lawyer could try to compel the state case to resolve this issue before he self-surrenders on the federal. Again, we're not lawyers, but these are the things you should try to work through. Okay.
And just one more thing to add. If he can't get it resolved before prison, it's something arranging the call is something he will coordinate with the unit counselor. They're not always the most accommodating in many respects, but when it comes to something like this, they'll bend over backwards to get it done because there's third parties watching.
Okay, so also his court date's not long after his self-surrender date. Say that it all gets handled then and it's all closed out and everything, then would he qualify for RDAP?
Don't know the answer to that question because I haven't seen the probation report, any disclosure of abuse. So I want to be very careful about responding yes or no. What I can convey to you is if he's eligible for the program based on his crime, any history of abuse in the pre-sentence report, recommendation from the judge helps, his chances are improved. If any, he wouldn't even be eligible for the program unless these outstanding cases are removed. So if he qualifies elsewhere, he's not going to qualify unless these cases are removed. Okay, so you want to get them cleared, but I wanted to say, I can't say yes or no because I don't know all the details, but I do know for him to get in, he's got to have these cases removed. Okay. Jason, I see your hand up.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Great stuff. I'm hoping that what I can ask you help some other folks also. Sam has been working with me on the unique opportunity of having my, what is it called, Sam?
Pre-sentence report.
Yeah, the PSR amended. So finally today, I got a letter from my healthcare provider that I have been participating in the alcohol rehab program. Here's my prescriptions. And they're sending that letter to my attorney who has prepared a opportunity. I guess he prepared an order to send to the judge. My question for you is this: if I get this rare shot to have my PSR amended, should I include my release plan? Since I got this, if this thing can come open now, what do you think else should we do?
Well, Scott, Sam may have thoughts. If you can get your pre-sentence report amended, that would be terrific. I hope that happens because it's very difficult. So I know we've managed your expectations that we may not be successful, but I'm so glad that we've tried. And by the way, I applaud Jason for speaking openly because in a prior webinar, he had said he wished he had done a lot of this work in advance of even sentencing in his pre-sentence interview, but he wasn't aware of our team and in retrospect would have done things differently. So learn from that, from choices that he might have made. So thank you for talking openly about that. I think if you get the pre-sentence report amended in a way that you'd like it to be amended, that would be a massive home run for you right now. Then we could focus the reentry plan really with the case manager in prison down the road. Okay, but getting the pre-sentence report amended, if it happens with what we need in there, would be terrific. And then we would then update the release plan with some of these changes that have taken place. Because I know you're in counseling, we want to incorporate that in. But that would be my suggestion for now. Now down the road, you can share that release plan with your judge as you seek to get off probation early, right? Or look, we have clients. There are some judges. Judge David Carter here in Santa Ana. I've been to 7 or 8 of his sentencing. He has told defendants, you can write me from prison because I want to see you once you're in probation. Once you start probation, I want to see you back in my courtroom. I want to see how you did. I want to see if you're doing okay. Sounds crazy, right? Some of these judges visit prisons. They visited prisons and seen guys they've sentenced. So you can write a letter to your judge from prison, presuming it's the right message. At my sentencing, I said I was going to do this. I've continued to do this. I'm frankly grateful for this opportunity. Whatever the message is, that's okay. Next week, we're going to discuss writing to your probation officer, same message. So Jason, to your question, absolutely. At some point, it could be shared with the judge, but perhaps not right now as we're looking to amend the PSR. Let's focus only on those facts.
Got it. Thanks.
Mike, I see Mike, I see your hand.
Yeah, looking at the calculator, what is the transition for, or how do you identify or recognize in the calculator, the release calculator, the number of months for your FTC pattern score, et cetera?
Okay, Mike, since we're going to go over that tomorrow, and I just sent you that link, why don't I call you after this presentation and I can go through that with you separate?
Okay.
And we're also going to do it tomorrow. So I hope tomorrow with a couple of people who are on, we can actually go through an example of the calculator and Sam's going to lead that demonstration tomorrow. And then of course we'll share the calculator with everyone should they want to use it. So thank you for asking, Mike. We'll go through it. We're going to go through it tomorrow. Summer, I see your hand up.
I didn't know how to get it off.
Oh, that's
Sorry.
funny. That's funny. No problem. All right, so let me take a look and confirm we've answered all questions along the right here. I did include a link to the top 10 surrender checklist. So it's there. Some of you have asked for Joseph's reentry plan. We can go ahead and send that. How do you send books? We discussed that a little bit. You should create an Amazon. You can create an Amazon book list, share it with your network. They can send it to you. Technically, you're not supposed to have more than 5 books in your locker. When done with a book, you can go to the mail room, pay to send it home, or donate it to the library. I released with a few books, but understand you're not supposed to have tons of books in your locker. Tomorrow, I do want to touch on the prison hustle a little bit more, and in addition to iPhones. Nate said something that was very important, which is after several months, people become very comfortable in the camp and they kind of think like, okay, I understand it. I get it. Now I can kind of manipulate it to my liking. We want to talk about what happens when people feel that way and the consequences that follow. So tomorrow we'll touch a little bit more on the prison hustle, including disciplinary infractions, because you should understand it before you go to prison. We've discussed the visitation form. Are there stamps and things of that nature? If there's anything that I'm missing, let me know. If not, I think we've
Justin,
got a successful
Justin, one thing I wanted to add that I think doesn't get covered in these conversations necessarily. But one of the biggest challenges doesn't necessarily have to do with prison, but how we react to prison. There's a lot of things in our lives that when you go in are now beyond your control. You'll get a phone call, the plumbing broke, or the heating this, or the car broke down. And your spouse might be frustrated, looking for an answer, or a loved one, or your son, or whatever it is. And what we have to realize when we go in, and it's sort of an extension of what you learn in a 12-step program, that sometimes you just need to let things go and they'll work out okay. You're not going to be able to be in control like you are in your life at the moment. And, there's an expression, I can't, he can, so I'll let him, right? So whatever your belief system is, God, higher power, serendipity, the universe, whatever, just know that things will work themselves out, even if you can't be exercising direct control. And if you keep that mindset, it'll help you get through the time in prison with a much more peaceful mindset, because at the end of the day, there's nothing you can do about it anyway. So stressing out and making yourself crazy over it while you're in that confined environment is only going to put a much huger stress on you while you're already in a stressful environment. So I just want to share that.
That's right. Also, perhaps that's a really important point. And it sounds very stoical and philosophical, but it's simple. You focus on what you can and cannot control. I think that was the first great message Michael Santos taught me while in custody, right? You may not be able to control your bunk or your job. If they make the showers cold, they do fire drills at 3 o'clock in the morning. If they remove the weights, okay. You may not be able to control that, but you can certainly control your attitude and the way you communicate to your family and what you do all day. Because as anyone who's been to a minimum security camp can attest, the highest value there isn't violence. I didn't see any violence there. It's boredom and dudes going crazy. It's just literally like watching paint dry, obsessed over mail call and freaking out if email goes down. I remember one prisoner used to freak out because one guard didn't want to make the extra walk to get the New York Times. That's too far of a walk. I don't want to bring the papers back. He would get irate and proving the institution was winning, right? It was can't control if the guard doesn't want to walk to get the New York Times because it comes at a separate time from regular mail call. Can't control that, but it would really derail their progress and they'd call home and make matters worse.
Thank you.
Michael, we did a great webinar, becoming uncomfortable, getting comfortable in an uncomfortable environment. That's kind of the heart of serving time in the Bureau of Prison. And then you'll never be disappointed. Everything else is a benefit. Any other questions? Summer, I'm not calling on you. I know the hand is there by mistake. No problem. Okay, great. So it's 10 o'clock. I'm going to end the recording. Again, tomorrow we're back on at 8:30 Pacific, 11:30 Eastern, and we're going to cover some of these subjects, also dive into some other ones as well. And I'm going to go through the calculator for all of you. So thank you very much for participating. Very appreciative and grateful. Our participants every week is growing. By the way, of course, everything we're giving away here is free. If you think your family would benefit from listening, invite them. If you think your lawyers would benefit from learning, invite them, because sometimes lawyers give advice to their clients and they have good intentions, but it could be the wrong advice. And if you think they would benefit, invite them. We just want to educate and teach and really share everything that we've learned going through this process. So please spread the word about these webinars. We'd love as many people to join as possible.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, guys. See you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.